Thank you very much, Dario, and good morning, everyone. I think, Dario, you've really tried to lift everybody up. I hope I don't push you back down again, because I'm going to talk a bit about the scale of the problem, but I'll try and stay positive. Dario introduced me. I'm Jemima Murray. I work in the Home Office in the fraud policy team. So me and my team think about fraud all day, every day. That's all we do. So before I came on stage today, literally, what was the last thing I thought about? When I leave a room, when I wake up in the morning, when I'm bored in a meeting, or when I get on or even off the tube, what do I think about more than anything else? I think, where's my phone? Where's my phone? That's what I think so many times, all day long. These little devices, they've wormed their way into our lives, into our minds. We all have them, and they're so important. They add so much to our lives. And for some people, because I have 2 teenagers, they are our lives. We live via them. These and other miracles we now take for granted, the internet, fast computing, Wi-Fi and signals anywhere in the world, social media, instant banking, they're all there to make it so easy to stay in touch, pay bills, and even to entertain us anywhere we are. We can even renew our mortgages or file our tax returns from the beach. This is all so much easier now. But as we've discovered, as probably everyone in this room knows, making it easy for people to reach out and make connections has its downsides. Just as we can easily interact with people we want to contact, others can easily contact us. And this is what fraudsters are relying on. Before they can defraud us, they need to contact us. And what better, easier, cheaper way is there to find victims than sending out messages to as many people as possible on these things? And that's why we're all here today. And I know that everyone in this room recognizes that. So this is the bit where I'm telling you the scale of the problem in the UK. Fraud is the largest crime type in the UK, over 40% of all crime. And this causes damage in many different ways. It causes economic damage, firstly, of course, to victims, but also to banks and other institutions who have to pick up the cost. It can cause very deep distress to people. Even in cases where people do get their money back, they might still suffer emotional or mental health problems. And of course, it damages trust. Many of us have started to question genuine communications from businesses, friends, and the government. I know I have. And of course, it actually funds further crime. We know that fraudsters often operate in criminal gangs that are undertaking other activities. And the scale of this in the UK is huge. We're talking about 6% of adults who are victims. That's 3 million adult victims in the UK, with billions lost to scammers every year. So what are we going to do? Firstly, we need a proper deterrent. We need a beefed up law enforcement response. Secondly, we need to block fraud attempts in their tracks. And finally, we need to empower people, and we need to help people avoid frauds and give better support to victims. In May this year, my team in the Home Office published a fraud strategy which sets out a whole system approach to deliver these 3 things and to cut fraud overall. The strategy includes 50 actions, and I'll tell you a bit about some of them, but not all of them. So firstly, the deterrent, beefed up law enforcement response that I talked about. Now, we know we aren't going to and we can't arrest all fraudsters. For a start, we don't have the prison places, but we obviously need to stop as many as possible. We announced in the strategy that we've set up a new national fraud squad, and this is going to take an intelligence-led, proactive approach to tackling fraud. So it's not going to be about waiting for reports to come in and then trying to match the information together. It's actually about identifying and targeting the worst offenders, the criminal gangs who are behind some of this, and going after and disrupting them. The squad is made up of 100 existing investigators. We've also brought in 200 new people already, and there's another 200 will be coming in the next 18 months. So that's already up and running. We all know that criminals are getting better at exploiting technology to commit fraud on a large scale. And law enforcement need to match these growing capabilities. The College of Policing are going to review police training in digital skills, because without the right basics, it's like operating with one arm tied behind your back. When frauds have been committed, we need to ensure that victims are getting the support they need. Next year, we're going to be replacing action fraud, which is the way that people are supposed to report fraud and cyber crimes to the police, with a new system. And this new system will provide much better support for victims, as well as producing better intelligence for law enforcement. And of course, that is what will be fed in to the new proactive intelligence-led policing model that I talked about. We're also hoping later this year to launch a review to establish how to improve economic crime prosecutions so that cases do not fail on technicalities. So that's the first element that I was talking about. But prevention is usually better than cure, and we need to block fraud attempts at source. And this is where you come in, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. I expect everyone in the room has had a suspicious text message. It's got, as I said earlier, it's gone so far that I've actually ignored messages from friends because it was a new number and I assumed it was fraud. And this is, of course, deeply corrosive. In exploiting our best friends to victimize us, fraudsters are demolishing trust and putting people in this room's business model at risk, I'm sure. Now, we've done a lot already. We agreed a charter with telecoms operators, and they've introduced firewalls to detect and stop scams, and that's had a huge impact. The firewalls have stopped over 600 million scam messages since January last year, but there is a lot more we need to do. And some of the things we mentioned in the strategy, we are going to ban cold calls on financial products, so fraudsters can't dupe people into buying fake investments. And we want to clamp down on routes criminals use to send scam texts in bulk and to spoof numbers. So we're going to ban SIM farms, and we've already had a consultation on that, and we'll be responding on that soon. This will stop criminals using SIM farms to send thousands of scam text messages at once. And now we're also looking at text aggregators and application-to-person services. Your community is obviously very well placed to help with this. We know that criminals are abusing these legitimate services, both through smishing and artificially inflated traffic. Criminals are also spoofing legitimate sender IDs. And I know that your sector has done a great deal to tackle this. The Mobile Ecosystem Forum Sender ID Registry that Dario talked about protects many spoof brands. The Forum has also been a champion of the use of firewalls, and I know that the Forum has developed its own code of conduct with BT following suit with an application-to-person code of conduct. But as technology advances, so does the threat. Firewalls need to evolve to match that. And AI is only going to make it easier for criminals to evade filters. Criminals are also going to move into other areas, such as online messaging. So we all collectively need to do our best to predict what's going to happen and adapt to it. And we think that more needs to be done to stop criminals targeting people in 3 broad areas. We think we need greater transparency in the supply chain. We need to keep protecting users with better, evolving firewalls, and we need to keep bad actors out of the market. I think all of these measures are essential to ensure trust and to maintain a healthy market. But it's not just telecoms, of course. We're looking much more broadly. We're looking at the whole of the tech sector. You might have heard people talking about the online safety bill, which is going to hold companies to account. This bill will require user-to-user platforms, such as social media and search services, to ensure that they have systems in place to tackle fraud. These companies will have to put in place processes to stop fraud appearing and to remove any that gets through quickly. Online advertising is also increasingly being used to snare victims, and the largest in-scope platforms will have to prevent fraudulent adverts appearing on their site. We're hoping that we will have, this is still a bill going through Parliament. We hope this will become an act and get royal assent in the next couple of months, certainly before the parliamentary session ends, late October, early November. As well as that, we're also working with a wider range of online companies, bigger than just the scope of the online safety bill, to develop a charter of commitments to reduce fraud. We expect this will cover blocking more frauds, removing scams quickly, better data sharing, and closer working with law enforcement. It's quite similar areas, but we can be a bit more specific and more detailed because it's not legislative, it's a voluntary measure. And we hope we can say a lot more about that in the autumn when we publish this charter. And of course, it's not all on industry. We also, within government, set up the National Cyber Security Centre in 2016, which has a role in protecting the UK from online harms. They've taken down over 130,000 scams since their suspicious email reporting service launched in 2020. They're also very happy to talk to industry and give them advice about how they can protect themselves. So I realise, looking at all of this, that we are asking a lot of industry, and we need to ensure they deliver. We've appointed Anthony Brown MP as the Prime Minister's anti-fraud champion to drive the industry response. He's very interested in talking to people and getting ideas from them about how they can cut fraud, if anyone wants to ask me about how they can get in touch with him. But overall, we need every part of the system, industry, government, law enforcement, to work well together. So I've covered just 2 of the elements of the strategy. The third one is about empowering people, helping them to find it easier to avoid frauds and spot frauds in the first place. We're working on a broad communications campaign to do this, which we hope will launch later this year. And we also want to help people who have become victimised and give them better support. There's a number of things we're doing. We're working with the City of London Police to roll out economic crime victim care units across England and Wales. And we're supporting the Trading Standards Scams team in a national rollout of their multi-agency approach to fraud. These will enable fast information sharing between agencies to identify the needs of vulnerable people. Fraudsters often target vulnerable people, and then they can become victims over and over again. We need to break that link. And finally, we're going to change the law so that more victims of fraud will get their money back. So those are the 3 elements of the strategy, but there are a few things just underpinning all of it. And one of them is data sharing, which is totally fundamental to the fight against fraud. And we're working very closely with industry to ensure we are all making the best use of the data we have by sharing it with the right people quickly. I hope we can say more about that when we publish the online charter I mentioned earlier soon. So I've talked in a very UK-centric way so far, but fraud is not just a problem in the UK, and I think it's a growing problem around the world. And in fact, we estimate that about 70% of fraud targeting UK people involves one or more fraudsters operating overseas. So there's a lot of an overseas element in all of this. And we need to work more closely with allies abroad so that fraudsters find there is nowhere they can hide. So next year, we're going to host a summit to set up a new international partnership to work collectively with other countries who want to cut fraud. We're also stepping up cooperation at an operational level, including through our world-leading intelligence agencies, and we've talked a little bit more about this in the strategy which we published. Okay, so to summarise, I think we'd all agree it's in our interests to rebuild trust, and to do this we need a beefed-up law enforcement response that will identify and stop fraudsters. We need to block frauds at source by making it harder for fraudsters to exploit technology and telecoms, and we need to empower people to recognise, avoid, and report frauds, and to help them to get the support they need. Thanks.
So thank you, Jemima, and thanks. We've covered a lot of ground.
I covered a lot of ground.
I think there might be multiple questions maybe as well, so if there is a microphone. But I'll start with one with you as well. Let me play a bit of devil's advocate in this case. We've heard a lot about protecting the customers.
Yeah.
But do customers need to protect themselves? If I have a car and it's stolen, it's my fault. If my house is burgled, it's my fault. Yeah. What about my digital data?
Yeah, no, Dario, I think before I took this job, I probably would have instinctively agreed with you. I can certainly see the logical case that you're making. But the more time I've spent in this area, and I see the way that fraudsters have evolved, I think there's more and more a case for intervention. So what I'm really talking about is this shift that we've seen from unauthorized fraud, which is what fraud really was 10, 15 years ago. Somebody would have managed to get your bank details. They'd contact your bank. You'd have nothing to do with it. They'd somehow convince the bank that they were you, and they'd withdraw money from your account. And that's sort of unauthorized fraud. You're not involved. Banks have actually got better at spotting that, put in a lot of protections, which we've all seen and probably found a little bit frustrating. But what that means is that fraudsters have shifted their model to what we call authorized fraud, which is where individuals are sort of manipulated into believing something that's not quite true and then making a transfer to a fraudster themselves. So the sorts of models that fraudsters use, they're incredibly inventive, and they use all sorts of different ways. But they might pretend to be HMRC with an unpaid tax bill. They might pretend to be a relative in distress. Or they might pretend to be a potential partner through a dating website, and spend sometimes weeks and months building up a relationship before they tell you about their operation that they need money for. So these kinds of sort of manipulative techniques are so hard to protect yourself from. I mean, the burglar does just steal your car. He doesn't, the car thief just steals your car, and no amount of sort of doesn't carry out this element of manipulation to deceive you, which is almost impossible for people to realize what's going on and get away from. So, a big element of what we need to do is raise awareness that there are so many fraudsters operating. Of course, it is all about public comms, but with fraudsters being this devious, I think it is our duty to protect them, protect people from them.
Well, thank you. So, fees industry is now looking at protection, and we have a question out there before.
Rob?
From Ian Matthews, I guess.
Hi, Jemima. Ian Matthews, WMC Global. You mentioned banning of sim farms, and I'm curious how Home Office can effectively enforce that. For example, in the States, they're already banned, and what threat actors are doing is they're disguising them as other pieces of legal electronic equipment, and they're getting through customs, and they're making it out into the wild. So imagine something that appears to be a stereo speaker comes in, looks like a stereo speaker.
Yeah.
When you pop it open, there's a sim box inside.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the main reason to ban them is because of the reason that people use them. And I think the point is that if we find them on people and they haven't got a legitimate reason to be using them, we know that there is a fraud going on effectively. So we're not going to be checking everyone's homes to look for these things. But where we do have a suspicion that fraud is happening, and there is an investigation, and we find one of these, and that makes it, clearly that's immediate a signal to law enforcement, and it's something that they can then investigate and prosecute on much more easily, in fact, than proving that fraud has happened. Proving that someone has a sim farm is a lot easier. So we're going to use it that way to try and prosecute fraudsters.
Great, thank you.
But we won't be obviously checking, that everyone isn't carrying them on the street, like with knives or something.
Sure. Great. Thank you very much.
Do we have more questions? If not, we have one from Team Green then. I'll wait for mine.
Hi, I'm Tim Green from MEF. We're hearing a lot more these days about deep fakes and faking of voices, where you kind of alluded to it in your talk about elderly grandparents perhaps getting a call from their grandchildren appealing for money, that kind of thing. Is there anything that the law can do to prevent that kind of crime?
I mean, it's already illegal. You're not supposed to pose as somebody you're not and deceive somebody. That's fraud. I think all of the sort of things that we're thinking about a lot in government and law enforcement at the moment, which are, how are deep fakes making it easier, and how is AI making it easier? What these things are doing is making it easier for fraudsters to commit fraud at scale. They're not really ultimately changing the nature of what's happening. It's still a person being deceived for gain of somebody else. That's fraud. So all of these things are illegal when they're used to defraud people. So I don't think we need a change in the law, but what I talked a little bit about when I spoke earlier was about making sure that law enforcement are sort of understanding and on top of all of this, and that's why we're looking at the digital skills that law enforcement have, because I'm not sure that they do have enough of those skills at the moment.
Thank you.
John?
Multiple questions coming.
Hi, John Brunner with Aegis Mobile. Question for you. Have you thought about or looked at Stir Shaken, and what are your thoughts about the effectiveness of Stir Shaken in the US market?
I didn't actually hear the word you're using. Is that like searching?
Stir Shaken.
Stir Shaken, which...
Oh, no idea what that is. So no.
Which we will cover later on as well. And Stir Shaken is a way
Stir shaking.
technology to manage sources of calling.
Okay.
Used in the US.
Okay.
My apologies.
Sorry, we haven't. Someone
with you
in my
later
team
if you're
probably has spent months dealing with it, but they've not mentioned it to me yet, so I don't know.
If you're here, I'll chat with you later.
We do. I think we do have
Andre knows about it, apparently.
somewhere as well. I thought it was Claudine. Yeah.
You have to get your head around so much terminology. At one conference, I was. Oh my God, sounds great. I was really intrigued to learn about pig butchering at another fraud conference. I don't know. Oh right, okay. Well, I can.
You will have to tell me about that.
No pigs were harmed.
No pigs are harmed. Good to know.
Hi, Claudine Bell, Virgin Media O2. I have a question specifically around vulnerable people, elderly people. At the moment where they encounter potential fraud, there can be delays in other government departments. It takes 26 weeks to get a lasting power of attorney in place at the moment. So it's really restrictive being able to talk to banks if you're a family member. And I just wondered, is any of the work that you're doing where we have verification in a digital way can be quite exclusionary, particularly for older people who may be suffering with dementia, as an example. Are you working cross-department to, in any way, expedite the process for a family member to step in and help there?
So I think about those things as well. My mum, I've gone through all of that in the last 2 or 3 years as well, and it's phenomenally complicated. And then once you've got the power of attorney, getting the banks to recognise it, actually that was harder than much more administrative burden than the power of attorney in the first place. I mean, the power of attorney is a massively powerful tool. And I think it's right that there are checks put in place before family members can put those can have those enacted over relatives. Did you tell me how long you think it takes to get a power of attorney at the moment?
It's currently taking 26 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. So half a year. Yeah.
So yeah,
I didn't realise it was that long. So I think we should perhaps have a talk with the government about that. But of course, my problem with all of that was getting the banks then to recognise it, which also took many months. That's a matter for the banks, and everyone's got their own policies. But I think the thing is, this is, I think you do have to be careful about using these things, and the government needs to, do all the checks it needs to do to make sure that they're valid. But no, it's not something that we've talked about in the strategy. But it's a good point.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Checks and balances, and I think we need to keep to the timing as well. So it's a big thank you, Jemima. We could speak much more. You're going to be here for us as well.
Yeah.
So we'll continue talking with you in our breaks and later on. Thank you very much. Thank you.